In the mist-shrouded town of Willow Creek, Pennsylvania, the nights held a chill that bit deeper than any winter wind. The kind of cold that settled into bones and reminded a person exactly where they stood in the world's indifferent hierarchy. For Sienna Voot, 24 years old and running on fumes, that place was at the very bottom. The grandfather clock in the lobby of the gilded obelisk struck 3 in the morning. Its chime echoed through marble corridors where Sienna had just finished scrubbing. 16 hours. That was the shift she had clocked. Her hands were raw, knuckles split from industrial cleaning solution. The lie that it was gentle was just one of many she had learned to swallow. She pulled her threadbare coat tighter as she pushed through the service entrance into the alley. The coat had been with her since she was 17, picked up from a donation bin. 7 years. It showed every one of them in faded fabric and desperate stitching. The alley was a canyon of shadows and rust. Industrial dumpsters lined the brick walls like silent witnesses to 1,000 forgotten nights. Sienna kept her head down. This route was faster, and faster meant getting home before exhaustion dragged her under completely. She had grown up knowing that the world did not offer safety nets. It offered lessons, hard ones, brutal ones. Lessons taught in the cold hallways of foster homes where she was just another file number, another mouth that needed feeding until the state check cleared. She remembered being 2 years old and standing in a parking lot. That memory was sharp despite the years. A woman's back walking away, a car door slamming, an engine fading into distance. That was the first time Sienna learned what it meant to be disposable. The foster homes that followed were a blur of temporary beds and rules that changed depending on who was angry that day. She learned to make herself small, learned to move through rooms without making sound, learned that hope was a luxury reserved for people who had never been left behind. By 18, she had aged out of the system with clinical efficiency. They handed her a pamphlet about community resources and wished her luck. She had been on her own ever since, cobbling together a life from whatever work she could find. Her bank account was a monument to failure. $17.43. That was what 6 years of work had accumulated to. Every time she managed to save a little, something would break. The universe had a way of keeping her exactly where she was. But Sienna had learned one thing. She had learned to keep moving. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant drowning. The sound hit her halfway through the alley. It was faint, a weak, rattling gasp that barely registered over the ambient noise of the city at night. Most people would have missed it entirely. Most would have hurried past, eager to get home, and locked doors against the darkness. But Sienna was not most people. She stopped. Her breath clouded in the freezing air as she listened. There it was again. Not a rat, not wind, something else. Something that sounded like a death rattle. Her instincts screamed to walk away. Nothing good happened in alleys at 3 in the morning. She knew this, had known it since she was old enough to understand that the world sorted people into categories of worth. But her feet moved sideways toward the sound, toward one of the massive industrial dumpsters set back against the brick wall. The lid was partially open, frost clinging to its edges. Steam rose from inside, heat of decay meeting frozen air. Sienna's hand trembled as she reached for the lid. Every instinct told her to run. Every memory of being the one left behind told her to stay. She pushed the lid up. It groaned on rusted hinges. The smell hit her first. Rot and garbage and something sweet and wrong. She fumbled for her phone, using its dim light to peer inside. The bundle was small, impossibly small, wrapped in what had once been white cashmere, but was now stained with filth and ice. She reached in, her fingers brushing fabric and then skin that felt like frozen marble. Her hand jerked back instinctively, but then she forced herself to look closer. It was a baby. A girl, no older than 6 months, lying among the trash like something discarded. The child was not crying. Babies were supposed to cry. This one was too cold for that. The infant's skin had a terrifying blue tint under the weak light. Her tiny chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular patterns. Each breath looked like it might be the last. Sienna did not think. Thinking would have paralyzed her. Instead, she reached into the filth and lifted the bundle free. The weight was so light, it made her chest ache. As she pulled the baby close, something caught the light. A chain around the infant's neck. Platinum, delicate, with an amulet that pulsed with faint violet glow. Sienna stared, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The amulet was ancient, carved with a crest she recognized despite never having set foot in places where such symbols mattered. A silver bat entwined with a rose, the mark of the Nightshade family. Everyone in Willow Creek knew about the Nightshades. They owned half the state, had owned it since before the Revolution. They lived in the mountain fortress that loomed over the town like a constant reminder of hierarchy. Old money, old power, old secrets. This baby was one of theirs. Someone had thrown this baby away. Someone with wealth and power beyond imagination had looked at this tiny life and decided it was garbage. The rage that flooded through Sienna left her shaking. She knew what it felt like to be thrown away, knew it in her bones and blood. But this was an infant, helpless, innocent. She unbuttoned her coat and pressed the baby against her chest, sharing the only warmth she had. The child's skin was ice, but Sienna felt the faint flutter of a heartbeat. Still alive, still fighting. She did not call the police. She had learned long ago that systems were not designed to protect people like her. If she showed up with a dying baby, they would see a poor maid with a nightshade child and assume the worst. They would see a criminal, not a savior. So Sienna ran. Her studio apartment was a 30-minute walk. She made it in 15, her lungs burning from frozen air and exertion. The baby remained frighteningly still against her chest, occasionally letting out small gasps that sounded like questions. The apartment was barely warmer than the street. Sienna cranked the ancient radiator until it hissed and groaned. She unwrapped the baby carefully, terrified of what she might find. The cashmere fell away to reveal a silk onesie embroidered with the same bat and rose crest. Underneath, the baby's skin showed signs of severe hypothermia, blue lips, mottled extremities. But her eyes flickered open for just a moment, and Sienna saw something that made her breath catch. The irises glowed, a temporary amber hue that pulsed with inner light before fading back to hazel. It lasted only seconds, but it was enough. This was not just any child, this was something more. Sienna filled a basin with lukewarm water and began the careful process of warming the baby's core temperature. She worked methodically, talking in a low, steady voice. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got you now." The amulet continued to pulse against the baby's chest, a rhythmic violet glow that synced with the infant's heartbeat. Sienna watched it, mesmerized and terrified. Magic. That was what this was. Real, undeniable magic. She mixed evaporated milk with warm water and fed the baby drop by drop using a clean cloth. Each swallow felt like a small victory. The child's color began to improve slowly. The blue tint faded to pale pink. The breathing became more regular. Sienna sat in her rickety rocking chair and watched the infant sleep. She could not look away, could not let herself relax. Every time the baby's breathing stuttered, Sienna's heart stopped with it. She named her Lilith. The name came from nowhere and everywhere. It felt right, powerful. A name for a child who had been left for dead but survived. Dawn came slowly, painting the grimy window with shades of gray. Sienna had not slept, had not dared to close her eyes. The television in her neighbor's apartment came on around 8 in the morning. The walls were thin enough that Sienna could hear every word. At first, it was usual morning news, weather, traffic. Then the tone changed. The anchor's voice took on that quality of barely contained alarm. Sienna turned on her own television, volume low. The headline blazed in red letters. Nightshade heir kidnapped. Sienna's blood turned to ice. The news showed the Nightshade estate, that massive fortress on the mountain. Police cars and black SUVs swarmed the grounds. A spokesperson stood at a podium. At approximately midnight last night, an infant girl was abducted from the Nightshade Gardens by professional mercenaries. The child, daughter of Killian Nightshade, is approximately 6 months old. A reward of $10 million has been posted for her safe return. Midnight. The news said the kidnapping happened at midnight. But Sienna had found Lilith at 3 in the morning, 3 hours later, and the baby had been in that dumpster long enough to nearly freeze to death. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and scrolled through photos she had taken. There, in the background, was a timestamp from a security camera. 2:47 a.m. Sienna zoomed in. The camera had caught something else. A figure in an expensive coat, face partially visible, dropping a bundle into the dumpster before walking away. She recognized him from news reports. Lord Silas, one of Killian Nightshade's oldest advisors, a man who stood beside the Vampire King in every public appearance. This was not a kidnapping. This was murder. Attempted murder, disguised to look like something else. Someone in Killian Nightshade's inner circle had tried to kill his daughter, had thrown her away like trash, and fabricated a story about mercenaries to cover the crime. The news continued, showing footage of security forces. The reporter mentioned escalating tensions between vampire clans, old rivalries, and political machinations. It clicked into place. Lord Silas wanted a war. Wanted to blame a rival clan for the death of Nightshade's heir. The death would justify violence, a purge of enemies. And in the chaos, someone would rise to power. Sienna looked at Lilith, sleeping peacefully. This child was not just an innocent life. She was a political pawn in a game played by immortals. And Sienna had accidentally stepped into the middle of it. The smart thing would be to take the baby to the police, let them handle it, walk away. But Sienna knew what would happen. The police would call the estate. Lord Silas would receive the child, and Lilith would disappear, this time permanently. No one would believe a poor maid who claimed to have found the child in a dumpster. She would be dismissed, discredited, possibly charged herself. The only person who might believe her was Killian Nightshade himself, the father, the king. Sienna made her decision between heartbeats. She packed what little she had, formula, clean rags, her last $17. She strapped Lilith to her chest beneath her coat. She was going to walk into the fortress of the most powerful vampire in Pennsylvania and hope he did not kill her before she could explain. The journey to Nightshade Mountain took most of the day. Sienna could not risk main roads where checkpoints had been set up. She kept to forest trails, paths she had learned during years exploring the woods. The cold was relentless. Her thin coat did nothing against wind that cut through trees like a living thing. But she walked 1 foot in front of the other because stopping meant giving up. The baby slept most of the way, her small body warming Sienna's chest. Occasionally the amulet would pulse with violet light, and Sienna would feel warmth spread through her torso. It was as if Lilith was protecting her savior, even in sleep. By the time Sienna reached the mountain base, the sun was starting its descent. The Nightshade estate loomed above, a Gothic nightmare of stone and shadow that looked like it had grown from the mountain rather than being built upon it. The final ascent was brutal. Her legs shook, her lungs burned. Several times she had to stop and lean against trees, willing herself to continue. Lilith grew heavier with each step, though the child could not have weighed more than 15 pounds. The iron gates appeared through trees like a mouth opening to swallow her. They were massive, at least 20 feet tall, wrought with intricate designs of bats and roses. 2 guards stood at attention, and even from a distance, Sienna could tell they were not human. They were too still, too pale. Their eyes reflected dying sunlight like animals caught in headlights. Sienna's courage nearly failed. Every survival instinct screamed to turn around, to run and forget this had ever happened. She could leave Lilith at a church, an orphanage, somewhere safe and anonymous. But she knew there was no safe place for this child except with her father, and if she walked away now, she would spend the rest of her life wondering if Lilith had survived. She forced her legs to move. One step, another. The guards noticed her when she was still 50 feet from the gate. They moved with inhuman speed, blocking her path. "State your business," one said. His voice was like gravel scraping ice. Sienna's mouth was dry. She tried to speak and found her voice had abandoned her. She swallowed hard and tried again. "I have something that belongs to Killian Nightshade." The guards laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It reminded Sienna of dry leaves skittering across a grave. "The king sees no one, especially not mortal beggars. Leave before we make you leave." One reached out to push her back. His hand was inches from her shoulder when Sienna threw open her coat. The amulet around Lilith's neck flared with brilliant violet light. The guards froze. The temperature dropped so fast that ice crystals formed in the air. "Look at the crest," Sienna said, her voice stronger now. "Look at her. This is his daughter. And if you turn me away, he will know, and you will answer for it." The guards stared at the glowing amulet, their expression shifting from contempt to fear. One pulled out a radio and spoke in rapid, clipped sentences. Minutes passed. Sienna stood there, holding Lilith, trying not to shake from exhaustion and terror. The violet light continued to pulse, growing stronger. Then he appeared. Killian Nightshade did not walk up the driveway. He materialized from shadows, as if darkness itself had taken form and decided to wear the shape of a man. He was beautiful in the way disasters are beautiful. Terrible and perfect and impossible to look away from. His hair was black as a crow's wing, falling past his shoulders. His skin was the color of moonlight, but it was his eyes that held her captive. They were voids, absolute darkness, that somehow contained universes of grief and rage and something else, something that looked like desperate hope struggling against extinction. He stopped 5 feet from her. The air between them felt thick, charged with energy that made Sienna's skin prickle. When he spoke, his voice was a low vibration that resonated in her chest. "Give her to me." It was not a request. It was a command backed by centuries of absolute authority. But Sienna found herself hesitating. She had carried this child for hours, had saved her life, had risked everything. She looked into Killian Nightshade's eyes and saw something that made her decision. Underneath the rage and power, she saw fear, raw parental terror. Sienna stepped forward on legs that threatened to give out. "She's cold. She needs to be warmed slowly. I've been feeding her diluted milk, but she needs proper nutrition." Killian took the bundle with hands that moved too fast for human eyes. The moment his fingers touched the cashmere, the amulet's light exploded into a supernova of violet brilliance. Sienna had to shield her eyes. When the light faded, Killian was cradling Lilith against his chest with impossible tenderness. He checked her hands, her face, listened to her breathing. His expression cycled through emotions too quickly to catalog. Then his gaze snapped back to Sienna. In a blur of motion, he was in front of her. His hand, cold as marble and impossibly strong, gripped her throat, not crushing, but holding her in place. "Where did you find her?" The words were whispered, but they carried the weight of an avalanche. "Who do you serve?" Sienna clawed at his hand, gasping. Her vision started to blur, but she forced words out. "Dumpster, behind the gilded obelisk. 3 this morning. She was freezing, barely breathing." Killian's eyes began to glow red. "Impossible! My council told me she was taken by Clan Devereaux. They said she was lost in the river." "Your council lied," Sienna rasped. Black spots danced in her vision. "Check the cameras. Back alley, 2:47 a.m. Lord Silas. I saw him throw her away." The words hung between them. Killian's hand remained on her throat for another heartbeat, then slowly released. Sienna collapsed to her knees, gasping, her hand going to her neck where bruises were forming. Killian turned to one of the guards. "Bring Elias. Now. Pull every security feed from the gilded obelisk, the alley, 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. He looked back at Sienna. You will come inside. You will explain everything. And if you are lying, your death will take days. Sienna struggled to her feet. She met his eyes despite every instinct telling her to look away. I'm not lying, and I'm not leaving until I know she's safe. Something flickered across Killian's face. Surprise, perhaps? Or recognition? What is your name? Sienna vowed. You are either the bravest or most foolish human I have ever encountered, Sienna vowed. He turned toward the gates, which swung open. Come, we will see which. Sienna followed him through the gates, into the fortress of shadows, knowing she had just stepped across a threshold from which there might be no return. The interior of the Nightshade Fortress was controlled darkness. Ancient tapestries hung from stone walls that had witnessed centuries. The scent of cold lilies filled the air, a funeral smell that reminded Sienna she was walking through a monument to the dead ruling the living. They entered what appeared to be a private study. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the valley below, where Willow Creek sprawled like a circuit board of lights. Killian laid Lilith on a velvet settee near a roaring fireplace. A man entered without knocking. He was shorter than Killian, built like someone who had spent lifetimes training for war. His eyes were the color of old steel. Elias, Killian said without looking up, pull the security footage from the gilded obelisk. Back alley, 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., and prepare the lower chambers. We may have a prisoner by dawn. Elias's gaze flickered to Sienna. My lord, this woman is the only reason my daughter is alive. Do as I command. Elias bowed and left. Killian gently removed the amulet from Lilith's neck, studying it. This belonged to her mother, he said quietly. It should have protected her, should have burned anyone who tried to harm her. He looked at Sienna. Yet you carried her for hours, and it did not harm you. Why? Sienna's throat was raw. I don't know. I just couldn't leave her there. Most would have. Killian returned his attention to Lilith. Most would have called authorities, collected the reward. Instead, you brought her directly into the den of monsters. The authorities would have given her back to whoever tried to kill her, Sienna said. I grew up in the system. I know how it works. Nobody would have believed me. Killian was silent. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge of something that might have been respect. You understand predation. Good. You will need that understanding to survive what comes next. Within the hour, Elias returned. My lord, the footage is ready. They moved to a chamber dominated by a massive screen. Killian gestured, and the footage began to play. Black and white, grainy but unmistakable. The alley behind the gilded obelisk. Timestamp, 2:47 a.m. A figure in an expensive coat approached the dumpster. Lord Silas, his face clearly visible in security lighting. He carried a bundle wrapped in white cashmere. He looked around once, then lifted the lid and dropped the bundle inside as casually as someone disposing of trash. Then he walked away. The footage continued. At 3:02 a.m., Sienna appeared. She approached the dumpster, opened it, pulled out the bundle. Even in grainy black and white, her desperation was evident. She held the baby close and ran toward the street. Killian's hands curled into fists. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. The quietness made it more terrifying than a shout. My own blood. My own council told me she was dead so they could trigger war with Devereaux. They threw her away like refuse. He turned to Elias. Bring me Lord Silas. I want him in the lower dungeons within the hour. Alive. I will deal with him personally. Elias nodded and disappeared. Killian looked at Sienna, seeing the bruises on her neck from his own grip, the worn soles of her shoes. You kept her through the coldest night of the year, fed her, kept her warm with nothing but your own body heat, then walked for hours to bring her home when you could have collected $10 million and disappeared. He stepped closer. Those who tried to kill her now know you are the one who thwarted them. Silas has allies. They will hunt you to erase the evidence. You cannot leave, not safely. I didn't do it for protection, Sienna said quietly. I know. Killian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. That is precisely why you are the only one I trust with her care. I am a king of the dead, Sienna vowed. I can offer my daughter power, legacy, immortality. But I cannot offer her the human touch she needs to thrive. He paused. I am hiring you. You will be her guardian, her caretaker. You will live in the East Wing and have anything you desire, provided you never leave her side. In return, I will be your shield against everything that comes for you. Sienna looked past him to where Lilith slept peacefully, the child who had been thrown away, the child who had survived. I want to go back to my simple life, she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was a lie. Killian stepped closer. His scent enveloped her, cedar and rain and something ancient. You have no home to return to. Your supervisor already fired you for missing your shift. Your landlord will evict you by week's end for missed rent. But those are minor concerns compared to what Silas's allies will do if they find you unprotected. He was right. Sienna knew he was right. I'll do it, she said. But I need to know you'll listen, that my voice matters in decisions about her care. For the first time since she had met him, Killian smiled. It was small, barely a curve of lips, but it transformed his face. Agreed. Welcome to the fortress, Sienna Voot. The East Wing became Sienna's new world. The rooms overlooked the valley with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. The furniture was antique, priceless, and utterly foreign to someone who had spent her life sleeping on donated mattresses. A nursery had been prepared adjacent to Sienna's bedroom. It was a space that spoke of wealth beyond measure. A cradle carved from dark mahogany, shelves lined with books in languages Sienna did not recognize, toys that looked too precious to play with. But it was also empty, cold. A room prepared by people who understood opulence but not comfort. Sienna spent her first 3 days transforming it. She raided linen closets for soft blankets, moved the cradle closer to the fireplace, brought in a rocking chair and positioned it where she could watch both cradle and door. Lilith thrived under her care. The child's color returned fully. Her amber eyes, which occasionally still glowed with that strange inner light, began to track movement and focus on faces. She started to make sounds, attempts at communication that made Sienna's chest ache with unexpected tenderness. The staff regarded Sienna with a mixture of reverence and suspicion. She was mortal in a house of immortals, poor in a palace of wealth, unknown in a place where bloodlines stretched back centuries. She did not belong, and everyone knew it. But Killian had made his position clear. Sienna was under his protection. That protection came with invisible walls that kept other residents at careful distance. News arrived on the 4th day. Lord Silas had been captured trying to flee the state. He was now in the lower dungeons, awaiting judgment. The capture had been swift and brutal. 3 of his conspirators had died resisting arrest. 2 more were imprisoned alongside him. Killian himself was a ghost. He appeared only at night, materializing from shadows to stand in the doorway of the nursery. He never entered fully, just watched from the threshold as Sienna sang old folk songs to Lilith, songs she had learned in foster homes from the few kind souls she had encountered. Sienna pretended not to notice him, but she was always aware. His presence was like a change in air pressure, impossible to ignore. One night during a storm that rattled the mountain, Killian actually entered the nursery. Sienna was rocking Lilith, who had been fussy from atmospheric pressure. She looked up as he approached. "She has your temperament," he said quietly, watching his daughter. "Stubborn, refusing to accept discomfort without protest." "She's strong," Sienna replied. "She survived things that should have killed her. That kind of strength doesn't come from nowhere." Killian moved to the window, looking out at the storm. Lightning illuminated his profile. Her mother was strong too, strong enough to give birth to a child that was half impossible, strong enough to die doing it. It was the first time he had mentioned Lilith's mother. Sienna wanted to ask more, but sensed the moment was fragile. "Why did you stay in the alley?" Killian asked suddenly. "You could have walked away. You had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Sienna looked down at Lilith, who had fallen asleep. Because when you have nothing, you realize that life is the only thing that actually matters. I didn't see a princess or a vampire heir. I saw a soul that the world had decided didn't count. I couldn't let the world be right. She met his eyes across the dim room. I've spent my whole life being someone who didn't count. I wasn't going to let her start her life that way. Killian was silent for a long moment. Then he crossed the room with inhuman speed, stopping just in front of Sienna's chair. He reached out, his pale fingers brushing her cheek. The touch was no longer cold. It felt warm, almost human. "You are a rare creature, Sienna Vout," he whispered. "This world does not deserve you." Then he was gone, vanished back into shadow as if he had never been there. But Sienna's cheek burned where he had touched her, and she knew that something had shifted between them. Weeks passed in strange rhythm. Days blurred into nights. Sienna learned the patterns of the house, the way shadows moved, the way staff avoided direct sunlight from the few windows that allowed it. She learned that the estate operated on rules older than the country itself. She grew close to Lilith in ways that transcended simple caretaking. The child responded to her voice, her touch, her presence. When Sienna left the room even briefly, Lilith would cry until she returned. It was a bond that Sienna had never experienced. For the first time in her life, she felt needed. Not as labor, not as a temporary solution, but as someone essential to another person's well-being. Killian's visits became more frequent. He would sit in the shadows while Sienna worked, his presence constant, but no longer oppressive. Sometimes he would speak, sharing fragments of history or observations about the world. Sometimes he was silent, simply existing in the same space. Sienna found herself looking forward to those moments, listening for the particular quality of silence that meant he had arrived. One evening, as she fed Lilith by the fireplace, Killian entered and sat in the chair across from her. It was a break in pattern. He had never sat before. "The other bloodlines are restless," he said without preamble. "They know what Silas attempted. They know a mortal woman exposed the plot. Some see it as weakness on my part. Others see opportunity." Sienna's hand paused with the bottle. "What kind of opportunity?" "The kind where they test boundaries, push against old agreements. There is a gathering scheduled, the Crimson Conclave. It happens once every century, a reaffirmation of the laws that govern our kind. And they want you to attend. They are requiring it. If I refuse, it will be seen as admission of weakness. If I attend, they will use the platform to challenge my fitness to rule, to question why my daughter was targeted by my own counsel." He looked at Sienna directly, including the decision to place her care in mortal hands. Sienna felt ice forming in her stomach. "They'll come after me. Not directly. They will challenge your worthiness, your ability to protect her. They will test you in ways that have broken stronger beings." "Then I won't go. You attend, I stay here with Lilith where it's safe." Killian shook his head. "That is not an option. If you remain behind, they will claim I am hiding you because you are not capable. They will demand I replace you with someone of their choosing. Someone who will report back to them about everything that happens within these walls." The implications settled over Sienna like a weight. "So I have to go, have to prove myself in front of hundreds of vampires? 743 at last count." Killian's expression was grim. "And they will not be kind. The test they will demand is called the Hollow Gate. It is a trial of the psyche designed to expose weakness and fear. Most mortals who attempt it die. Those who survive are often broken." "Then I'll be the exception," Sienna said with more confidence than she felt. Killian studied her. "You have 3 days to prepare. I will teach you what I can. Mental shields, ways to anchor your thoughts. But ultimately, you will face the Hollow Gate alone." "I understand." "Do you?" Killian leaned forward. "These beings have existed for centuries. They have perfected cruelty. They will tear into your mind and pull out every moment of pain, every abandonment, every time you felt small and worthless. They will use it against you until you break." Sienna looked down at Lilith. Then I won't break. I've got too much to protect now. The training began the next night. Killian took her to a chamber deep in the fortress, a room lined with mirrors that reflected nothing. He taught her to build walls in her mind, to compartmentalize memories so they could not be weaponized. It was brutal work. Every time Sienna thought she had achieved control, Killian would push harder, finding gaps and exploiting them with clinical precision. Again, he would say, you are letting emotions dictate your responses. They will use that against you. Sienna practiced for hours each night, until her head throbbed and vision blurred. But slowly, incrementally, she improved. Learned to recognize when her mind was being probed. Learned to redirect attention away from vulnerable memories. On the second night, Elias joined them. He taught Sienna basic self-defense, movements designed to give her a fighting chance if things went wrong. You will not win against one of us in combat, Elias said bluntly, but you can create enough chaos to escape. That is what matters. Survival, not victory. He moved her through drills until her muscles screamed. Taught her where to strike for maximum effect, how to use an opponent's momentum against them. On the third night, Killian presented her with a weapon, a silver crossbow, small enough to conceal but powerful enough to do real damage. Silver is one of the few things that can truly harm us, he explained. The bolts are tipped with it. You have 6 shots. Use them wisely. Preferably, do not use them at all. Sienna took the weapon, feeling its weight. It was surprisingly light, elegant in its lethality. I hope this is all unnecessary, she said quietly. Hope is a luxury we cannot afford. Killian placed his hand over hers on the crossbow. But preparation is not. Whatever happens at the conclave, remember this. You are not alone. I will be watching. And if they cross the line from test to torture, I will intervene. Consequences be damned. The night before they were to leave, Sienna stood in the nursery watching Lilith sleep. The child had grown in the weeks since Sienna had found her. Her face had filled out, losing that terrible fragility. Her eyes were brighter. She smiled now, a toothless grin that made Sienna's heart clench. Killian appeared in the doorway. If I don't come back, Sienna began. You will come back. But if I don't, promise me you'll find someone who loves her, not just someone competent, someone who will sing to her and hold her when she cries and make her feel like she matters. Killian crossed the room. He stood close enough that Sienna could see fine details of his face. The way his eyes, normally so dark, held flecks of silver when light hit them right. You will come back, he repeated, because you are stronger than you know, and because she needs you, because I need you. The last words were barely audible, a confession pulled from somewhere deep. Before Sienna could respond, Killian turned and walked away. But the words lingered in the air like smoke. The next morning, they prepared to leave. Sienna dressed in clothes provided by the estate, dark fabrics that would not show dirt or blood, practical boots, the crossbow hidden beneath a long coat. Lilith would stay behind under heavy guard. Elias had personally selected the security detail. The fortress was locked down. Every entrance watched. Sienna held the baby one last time, breathing in that unique infant scent, memorizing the weight of her. I'll be back, she whispered. I promise. Lilith's amber eyes looked at her with impossible intensity. The amulet around the baby's neck pulsed once with violet light, as if in response. The convoy consisted of 3 armored vehicles. Sienna rode with Killian in the middle car, surrounded by guards who watched the road with predatory focus. They drove for hours, heading deep into mountains where no humans ventured. The road became less maintained, then barely a path. Finally, they stopped at what appeared to be solid rock. Killian placed his hand against the stone. Something shifted. The wall began to open, revealing a tunnel descending into darkness. This is the threshold, Killian said. Once we pass through, you are in their territory. Everything changes. Trust no one except me and Elias. Speak only when spoken to, and above all, do not show fear. They can smell it, and they will use it to destroy you." Sienna nodded, her throat too tight for words. The vehicles moved forward into the mouth of the earth, and the stone sealed shut behind them with the finality of a tomb closing. The descent lasted 20 minutes. The tunnel walls pressed close, carved from living rock and lined with veins of crystal that pulsed with bioluminescent light. The air grew colder with each mile, carrying scents that Sienna's human nose could barely process. When the vehicles emerged into open space, Sienna's breath caught. They had entered a cavern so vast that her eyes could not find the ceiling. Stalactites hung like fangs, and the floor had been polished to a mirror shine. At the center stood the Cathedral of the Crimson Moon. It was not built so much as grown from the salt and quartz of the mountain itself. Spires reached upward into darkness, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Figures moved in the shadows, hundreds of them. Their pale faces turned toward the convoy with predatory interest. "Remember what I taught you," Killian said quietly. "Build your walls, keep your mind guarded, and whatever you see in the hollow gate, know that it is designed to break you. Do not let it." They exited the vehicle. The assembled vampires parted as Killian walked forward. Sienna followed half a step behind, her chin raised despite terror clawing at her insides. The cathedral doors opened soundlessly. Inside, the space was even more oppressive. Columns of crystallized salt rose from floor to ceiling. At the far end, elevated on a dais, sat 7 thrones arranged in a semicircle. 6 were occupied. The 7th, larger than the others, remained empty. That would be Killian's seat. The vampire on the central throne rose. He was ancient in a way that transcended mere age. His skin had the translucent quality of parchment. His eyes were milky white, pupils barely visible. "Killian Nightshade," the Ancient One said. His voice sounded like grinding stone. "You honor us with your presence, and you bring a guest." The way he said guest made it clear that Sienna was anything but welcome. "High Arbiter Malthus," Killian replied, formal and cold. "I bring the woman who saved my daughter's life when my own counsel sought to extinguish it. Sienna Vogt, who has more courage in her mortal heart than those who hide behind ancient laws and false loyalty." A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. Malthus descended from his throne with movements that suggested great age poorly maintained. He circled Sienna slowly, examining her. She forced herself to remain still, to meet his milky gaze. "A scavenger," Malthus said finally. "That is what you are, girl. You pick through the refuse of your betters and call it salvation. Tell me, Killian Nightshade, is this a jest? Do you mock the blood that binds us?" Killian's voice remained level. "I bring proof that blood means nothing without honor. My own inner circle, vampires of ancient lineage, threw my daughter away to die. This mortal woman, with no power and no standing, chose to save her. Which is more worthy of respect?" "Pretty words," another voice called. A female vampire with hair like spun copper stepped forward. "But words prove nothing. If this human is to remain in your household, if she is to be trusted with the heir to Nightshade, she must prove herself worthy. She must face the hollow gate." The chamber erupted with voices, some in agreement, others in protest. But the majority seemed to support the challenge. Malthus raised one withered hand, and silence fell. "The challenge is invoked. According to our laws, it cannot be refused. The mortal will face the hollow gate. If she survives and emerges whole, she will be recognized as guardian to the Nightshade heir. If she fails, she will be removed from service, and the child will be placed in more appropriate care." Killian's hand tightened into a fist. The hollow gate was designed to test vampires, not mortals. The psychic pressure alone could kill her. "Then she is not worthy," the copper-haired vampire said, with too many teeth showing. Sienna stepped forward before Killian could argue. "I accept the challenge." Every eye turned to her. She felt the weight of their collective shock. "Sienna, no," Killian said quietly, but she shook her head. "It's the only way this ends. They'll keep pushing until I prove myself or break. Better to do it now." She looked at Malthus. "When do we begin?" "Immediately. Follow me." They walked through corridors that seemed to shift as they moved. Sienna lost all sense of direction. The assembled vampires followed at a distance, a silent audience. They arrived at a chamber whose entrance was marked by a door that appeared to be made from solidified darkness. No handle, no hinges, just a rectangle of absolute void. "The hollow gate," Malthus announced. "Beyond this threshold lies a space where the psyche is laid bare. You will face manifestations of your deepest fears, your greatest shames, your most profound weaknesses. The chamber will use them against you." He turned to Sienna. "Most who enter do not emerge. Those who do are forever changed. You may withdraw now with no dishonor." Sienna looked past him to Killian. The Vampire King's face was a mask, but his eyes held something that looked like fear, not for himself, for her. "I'm ready," Sienna said. The door opened. Beyond it was darkness so complete that light seemed to die at the threshold. She stepped forward, crossed the threshold. The door sealed behind her with the sound of finality. For a moment there was nothing, just absolute darkness and the sound of her own heartbeat. Then the mirrors appeared. They materialized from the void, dozens of them, surrounding her on all sides. But they did not reflect her physical form. Instead, they showed memories. Moments pulled from the locked rooms of her mind. The first mirror showed her at 2 years old, standing in that parking lot, watching a woman walk away. The child Sienna was crying, reaching out with small hands, but the woman never looked back. The second mirror showed a foster home. She was 7, sitting at a dinner table with a family that was not hers. They talked and laughed around her as if she were invisible. When she tried to speak, they looked through her. More mirrors appeared, each showing a different abandonment. By age 12, huddled in a corner, while other children received birthday presents. By age 16, turned away from a job interview because the manager said she had that look, the look of someone who would not amount to anything. The mirrors multiplied. Dozens became hundreds, each reflection a wound that had never fully healed. Then the whispers began. They came from everywhere and nowhere, voices that sounded like every person who had ever dismissed her. "You are nothing, a speck of dust in an eternal night. Killian will tire of you. You are a novelty, a pet. When the amusement fades, you will be discarded. Lilith will grow powerful, and she will see what you truly are. A servant whose usefulness has expired. You do not belong in that fortress. You do not belong anywhere. You never have. You never will." Sienna sank to her knees. The weight of the voices was crushing. Every word struck like a physical blow, finding the places where she was already wounded and tearing them open wider. The darkness pressed in. She could not tell if her eyes were open or closed, could not remember why she had thought she could survive this. She was nothing, had always been nothing. The world had told her so 1,000 times, and the world had been right. She felt herself fracturing, pieces of her identity breaking away like ice calving from a glacier. In moments, there would be nothing left. Then she felt it, a warmth against her chest, phantom and impossible, but undeniable. The memory of Lilith's small body pressed against her in that frozen alley, the weight of the baby in her arms, the tiny heartbeat that had refused to stop. Sienna's hand moved to her chest, pressing against the memory. She thought of the moment she had pulled Lilith from that dumpster, thought of the choice she had made to stay instead of walking away. The voices were wrong. She was not nothing. She was the person who had stood in a freezing alley at 3 a.m. and chosen compassion over self-preservation. She was the one who had walked for hours through hostile territory to save a life that the world had decided did not matter. "I am not afraid of you," Sienna said into the darkness. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "I am not afraid of death because I have already lived through 1,000 small endings. Every time someone walked away, every time I was told I did not matter, I survived those. I am still here." She stood up, her legs shaking but supporting her weight. "I am the one who stood when everyone else ran. I am the warmth in the winter. I am the person who refused to let the world decide who deserves to live and who deserves to be thrown away." The mirrors began to crack. Fracture lines spread across their surfaces like lightning. "You cannot break me," Sienna continued, her voice growing stronger, "because I have already been broken, and I put myself back together, every time. I will do it again if I must, but I will not let you take from me what I have fought so hard to build." The mirrors shattered. The darkness recoiled. Light flooded the chamber, not from any external source, but from within Sienna herself. A warm, golden light that pushed back against the void. The door opened. Sienna walked through it into the cathedral, her head held high. The assembled vampires stared in stunned silence. Malthus looked at her as if seeing something he had not believed possible. Killian was at her side in an instant. His hands gripped her shoulders, his eyes searching her face for signs of damage. "I am whole," Sienna said quietly. "I passed your test." Before anyone could respond, Elias burst into the chamber, moving at inhuman speed. His face was drawn with urgency. "My lord," Elias's voice cut through the silence. "We've received urgent communication from the fortress. Lord Silas has escaped the dungeons." The chamber erupted in chaos. Killian's eyes blazed red. "How?" "He had help from within. 3 guards found dead, their keys missing. He's rallying his remaining loyalists." Elias's expression was grim. "My lord, they're attacking the estate. They're targeting the nursery." Killian's roar shook the cathedral. Several vampires flinched. "How many?" 20, at least, all bearing Silas's mark. This was coordinated. They waited until you were here, until the Guardian was occupied, to strike." Killian turned to Sienna. "I must go. Elias will get you back safely." "No," Sienna said. "We go together. That's my charge they're attacking. I'm not staying here while someone tries to hurt her." "Sienna, you just survived the Hollow Gate. You're exhausted. You'll slow me down. Then leave me behind when I do, but I'm not waiting here." Killian looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Elias, guard her with your life. If she falls, you answer to me." They ran, through the cathedral, through the tunnels, into vehicles that screamed up mountain roads at speeds that defied physics. Sienna braced herself against the interior walls, her hand gripping the crossbow. The journey back took half the time of the journey there. They arrived at the fortress to find the gates hanging from their hinges. Smoke rose from multiple points within the estate. The smell of blood was thick in the air. Killian vanished before the vehicle fully stopped. One moment he was there, the next he was a streak of shadow racing toward the main building. Sienna followed with Elias and guards, moving as fast as her human legs could manage. Bodies littered the courtyard, guards who had died defending their posts. The attackers had been ruthless and efficient. They reached the east wing to find hallways in chaos. Furniture overturned, tapestries torn from walls, signs of a battle fought room by room. Sienna's heart pounded as she ran toward the nursery. Please, she thought, please let her be safe. The nursery door was off its hinges. Sienna burst through, crossbow raised, and froze. Killian stood in the center of the room, surrounded by broken bodies. His clothes were torn and soaked with blood. His hands dripped red, but in his arms, unharmed and wide-eyed, was Lilith. The baby saw Sienna and immediately reached for her, making small distressed sounds. Sienna crossed the room and took Lilith, checking her frantically for injuries. Nothing. Not a scratch. "They never got close," Killian said. His voice was hollow. "Exhausted. I arrived before they could breach the inner chamber, but they tried. They would have killed her, Sienna." A sound from the corner made them both turn. A figure was slumped against the wall, injured but alive. Lord Silas, his expensive coat torn, his face showing damage from Killian's fury. Killian moved toward him with lethal intent, but Silas raised one hand. "Wait," the old vampire rasped. "Before you end me, you should know why." "I know why. Power. The same reason traitors always give." "No," Silas coughed, red staining his lips. "Not power. Mercy." Killian stopped. Explain, quickly." Silas looked at Lilith with an expression that was not hatred, but something far more complex. "Do you know what it is to live for 1,000 years, Killian? To watch everyone you love turn to dust? To see empires rise and fall and know that you will still be here when the next empire crumbles?" He laughed, a wet, broken sound. "Your daughter represents another eternity of this cursed existence, another soul trapped in an existence that has no end and therefore no meaning. I did not throw her away out of malice. I tried to give her mercy, death before immortality, a peaceful end before she could know the burden of forever." The room fell silent. Sienna felt ice forming in her veins. This was not the villain she had expected. Not greed or ambition, but despair so profound it had twisted into something that looked like compassion. "You speak of mercy," Killian said quietly, "but you forget. She is half mortal. She may not face eternity. She may have a human lifespan, a normal death. You would have stolen that chance from her. And if she does not, if she takes after you, then I have condemned her to watch everyone she loves die while she remains." Silas's eyes found Sienna. "You love her now, but you are mortal. In 70 years, you will be gone. She will remember you, will grieve for you, and then she will watch the next generation die, until grief is the only constant companion she knows." Sienna held Lilith tighter. The baby had stopped crying, was now watching Silas with those too intelligent amber eyes. "You are wrong," Sienna said, "about mercy, about what her life will be, because life is not measured in years. It's measured in moments, in choices, in the love we give and receive. Even if she lives 1,000 years, the years where she feels loved and safe and wanted will matter more than all the grief that might come after." She looked at Killian. "Your despair is not her destiny. She gets to choose what her life means." Silas closed his eyes. "Then I have failed, and perhaps that failure's the only mercy I deserve." Killian moved with sudden speed, but he did not strike a killing blow. Instead, he lifted Silas effortlessly and carried him toward the door. "You will not die here," Killian said. "You will be banished to the sun-scorched wastes, where our kind finds no shelter and no peace. You sought to end suffering by dealing death. Now you will face an existence where death would be the mercy you denied my daughter." Guards came to take Silas away. The old vampire did not resist. As he passed Sienna, he looked at her one final time. "Protect her from us," he whispered, "from what we are, what we have become." Then he was gone, dragged into halls that would lead to exile and slow deterioration. Killian stood among the wreckage of the nursery, his shoulders bowed under invisible weight. Sienna approached him slowly, Lilith still in her arms. "The estate is compromised," Killian said without looking at her. "Silas had more allies than I knew. They will regroup. Try again, and next time they might succeed." "Then we leave," Sienna said simply. Killian turned to face her. "Leave? You said it yourself. The world has grown too small. They know where to find us here. They know our defenses. So we disappear. We find somewhere they cannot reach. Somewhere Lilith can grow up without being a target. I am the Nightshade King. This fortress has stood for 5 centuries. My bloodline is rooted in this mountain. To leave is to abandon everything my family has built." Sienna looked around at the destroyed nursery, at the blood staining the floors. "What good is a kingdom if you lose your daughter defending it? What use is legacy if it costs Lilith her childhood? You can rebuild power anywhere, but you only get one chance to keep her safe." Killian stared at her. Then he looked at Lilith, who had fallen asleep in Sienna's arms, exhausted by trauma. His expression softened. "You would truly leave? Abandon comfort and luxury for uncertainty?" "I never had comfort before I came here," Sienna replied. "I never knew luxury until you gave it to me, but I have something now that I never had in all those years of poverty. I have family, I have purpose. As long as we're together, I have everything that matters." Killian reached out and gently touched Lilith's cheek. The baby stirred, but did not wake. Then we disappear, he said quietly. We become ghosts, and perhaps in anonymity we will find the peace that power never provided. The next hours were a blur of activity. Killian summoned his most trusted advisors. He gave orders for distribution of assets, dissolution of certain holdings, transfer of power to interim rulers who would manage the bloodline's interests in his absence. Sienna packed what little they would need: clothes for Lilith, the cashmere blanket she had been found in, cleaned but still showing stains of that night. A few toys, nothing extravagant. As dawn approached, Killian did something that shocked even his most loyal followers. He set the wards of the fortress to collapse. "My lord, you cannot," Elias protested. "The estate has stood for 500 years. It is the heart of the Nightshade legacy. And that legacy nearly got my daughter killed. Twice." Killian's voice was firm. "Let it fall. Let the mountain reclaim it. We will build something new, something not defined by ancient grudges and blood feuds." He paused, then looked at Elias. "You have served me faithfully for 3 centuries. I release you from your oath. You may stay and serve the interim rulers, or go and find your own path, but I will not ask you to follow me into exile." Elias was silent for a long moment, then he knelt. "I pledge to serve the Nightshade line. That line is not a place, it is a bloodline. Where you go, I follow." Killian placed his hand on Elias's shoulder. "Then you will be the first of our new household, small, free, and perhaps, finally, at peace." They left as the sun rose over the mountain. 3 vehicles carrying only essential personnel and supplies. Sienna sat in the back with Lilith in her arms, Killian beside her, Elias driving. As they descended the mountain road, Sienna looked back one final time. The fortress stood proud against the dawn sky, its spires reaching toward clouds painted gold by early light. It was beautiful, terrible, a monument to power and all the costs that came with it. Then Killian triggered the ward collapse. The sound was like thunder rolling across the valley. The fortress began to fold in on itself, stone returning to the mountain from which it had been carved. Within minutes there was nothing left but rubble and dust. They drove away from the destruction toward an uncertain future. 5 years passed. Sienna stood on a beach in a small coastal town far from Pennsylvania. The ocean stretched before her, vast and indifferent and beautiful. Lilith, now 5 years old, ran along the shoreline. Her laughter carried on the salt wind. She moved with grace that hinted at her vampire heritage, but her laughter was pure child, pure life. Killian stood beside Sienna, his hand resting gently on her back. 5 years had changed him. The hardness in his eyes had softened. The rigid control had eased into something that looked like contentment. "She has your spirit," he said quietly. "She has your strength," Sienna replied. They were not royalty anymore, just a family. Killian worked remotely for security firms, his centuries of tactical knowledge valuable even without the title. Sienna was pursuing a degree in social work, wanting to help children like she had been. Elias lived in the house next door, running a small bookstore and pretending to be Killian's eccentric older brother. Lilith ran back to them, clutching a seashell. "Look, Mama! Look, Papa!" The words still made Sienna's chest tight. This was her daughter in every way that mattered. Killian knelt to examine the shell, pointing out the spiral pattern, explaining the mathematics in terms a 5-year-old could grasp. Lilith listened with rapt attention, her amber eyes bright with curiosity. Sienna felt profound gratitude. She thought of that night in the alley, the choice she had made to open that dumpster lid instead of walking away. Everything had flowed from that single moment. "I love you," Killian said quietly. His words meant only for Sienna. "I have lived 1,000 years, and I did not understand what that meant until I watched you fight for her, for us." Sienna took his hand. "I never had anything worth fighting for before. Now I have everything." Lilith tugged at both their hands, pulling them toward the water. "Come on, the waves are perfect." They followed their daughter into the surf, leaving footprints that the tide would erase. Temporary marks from temporary lives. But in that moment, they were eternal. Not through power, not through immortality, but through the simple, fierce act of choosing to love and protect and believe that the person everyone else had thrown away might be the one who saved the world. As the sun set over the ocean, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson, Sienna held her family close. The girl from the gutter, the king who gave up his throne, the child who survived because someone refused to walk away. They were home, not in a place, but in each other, and that was everything.